Hello, everyone, and thank you
Hello.
for joining us on Shindig, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Abigail Majola.
And I'm Toby Moffett. Nice to have you. November 4th is a show that started some months ago, and it's aimed at looking at the day after the election and getting everyone to think about what their citizen responsibilities are as we move forward, hopefully, from this president and this administration. We've looked at climate and what we should do to undo the damage and move forward. We looked at immigration. We've looked at racial injustice and economic injustice, immigration, and why we need a broad-based immigration reform. And so Abby's going to tell you about this show.
So today we are reimagining the future of education, just given our new normal and the challenges we're facing with COVID-19 and this ongoing pandemic. We're going to ask questions like, what achievement gaps is COVID exacerbating? What requirements should schools meet to ensure that students, faculty, and staff are safe before reopening? If the future of learning is virtual, what can governments, universities, and the private sector do to ensure equal access to education?
And today we have four guests. Our first one is a public school teacher from Reynolds High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I had the honor during the 2016 presidential campaign, when I was working on the helping Hillary and the ticket in North Carolina, to visit Chris Wiley's classroom and to see what a great teacher he is. And I've wondered ever since what it must be like for him during the lockdown, because it seemed to me, in being in his classroom, so much of what he was doing to inspire and educate those students was really important to be done in person. So we're going to hear from Chris now. Chris, nice to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Toby. Glad to be here.
So from what I understand, in your area, or whether it's the county or the area, relatively speaking, you're a bit better off than a lot of other places in the country where students are not on the web, don't have computers. Now, obviously, you have a lot of students who are in those categories, but apparently the school system and the local government has done something about it. But even with that, even with laptops being given out, even with hotspots, what challenges have you faced?
Well, Toby, you're right. Our district is fortunate in that we've had devices, close to a 1-to-1 ratio with devices. And as soon as the lockdown started, as soon as the move to remote was made, we got those devices out of the schools and in the kids' hands. So it was a great sort of a first step. The next was access, so the hotspots get there. But what we're finding, and this is absolutely predictable and lamentable, I think, is that the same inequalities that were there in the classroom are showing up as we try to engage those students online. So some students, because of socioeconomic status, maybe they've got to work. So synchronous learning doesn't exactly fall into place. For some, they've got to be the caretaker for younger siblings because mom and dad have to go to work. They're what they call those essential workers. But overwhelmingly,
so are some of these young people reluctant to turn on that camera?
They are. There's the school I teach at has a wide range of socioeconomic sort of status at play. Some students are maybe embarrassed, but others, quite honestly, they have, they'll say so in private, but they may have younger brothers or sisters who climb on their lap, or they may have to, attend to a crying baby, and they don't like to have the microphones. You can hear from time to time when the microphones come on or when the video does come on, that there's just a lot of traffic as the household is managed.
You heard what I said about being in your classroom and how impressive it was. What's missing that you did in person?
I think the human element of teaching, which is what makes all the difference. Being able to connect with students, whether it's even just a pat on the shoulder or just making eye contact, just being able to read the room better, just being able to use body language and tone of voice and all of that to just connect with a student. It's all of the non-teaching moments that you pass them in the hallway and you can let them know, hey, I heard this was going on. I saw this was going on. Is everything all right? Let's put civics on hold and let me be a human being for a second. Is everything all right? Those are a little harder to do, with a Zoom meeting. But if the sincerity is there, I mean, you try like you can to bridge that gap.
Abby, question or?
Yeah, so I'm wondering too, so it seems like the COVID-19 pandemic is extending, right? I think in March we thought this would be 2 weeks and then a month, then it has now extended to 6 months with no end in sight. And so I'm wondering if there are any discussions, at your school about how do we continue this way, right? And what are the tools that our students will need? What are the tools that teachers will need as well, right? I think we're seeing a lot of burnout in lots of different industries because of what's happening. And so how are you all taking care both of the students and also, thinking ahead?
Well, I would say all of those decisions are generally made at the district level, and that just comes down from the state. Our plan right now is to phase in the youngest learners. So I think it's pre-K through second grade first, and kind of keep an eye on the numbers and sort of bring in the next cohort from there. It is a little concerning to think that the constant in any of these situations, whether kids are on and off or different cohorts, that the teacher is the constant in that situation. A lot of talk has been made about parents having the option. Not so much talk about teachers having the option to come in or not, and putting those, student choice and the parent choice vis-a-vis teacher choice or teacher safety. There has, at times we felt, and I think this is everywhere in the country, but we felt it's something of an afterthought in our role as public servants. So there are some assurances I think we'd like, but I think for the students, really, it's a matter of identifying exactly where the support needs to be. That's our English language learners, that's our EC, or we call exceptional children, that's the occupational course of study, the students who need it most, the youngest grades, and making sure that there are classified staff members who are also on hand with the teachers to support the students in ways that one teacher just simply can't.
What about the Abby's going to move to our next guest shortly, but what about the parent-teacher relationship? How has your relations with parents changed?
Well, it's funny you should say that. In March, when students were home with their parents, there was an outpouring of love, it felt like, from parents to say, I didn't realize your job was so hard, and thank you, and teachers have a tough job, and there was a lot of appreciation. Oddly, as this is dragged into the fall, and we're all still plugging away and doing our best, but it felt early on like parents were sort of like, your job is to take, to free me up so I can work, is to free me up. So, and again, it sort of fell back to that default of teachers as, I don't want to say babysitters, but just, keeping an eye on the kids to allow the rest of the society and economy to sort of flow. But
Well, thank you.
We clock in every day, so there's that.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, and we wish you best of luck. I am going to remind the audience that if you have any questions, you can submit them by clicking the question mark on your screen, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to come to the stage and ask a live question. So our next two guests are Jennifer Richwine and Professor Richard Williams. Jennifer is the Executive Director of Wake Forest University's Wake in Washington program. And Professor Williams teaches sociology at Notre Dame. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Jennifer, as we're digging in about how schools and universities have responded to COVID in an effort to address gaps and, whether these approaches have worked, I know that Wake Forest is currently in the midst of a hybrid semester on campus. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about the types of challenges that you all are experiencing and how students have reacted to, the university's communications around risk and cases that are happening on campus.
Sure, and I can speak more about the Wake Washington program here in DC than on campus, but I will say everything that we do is in tandem. So everything that we've done with the Wake Washington program has been very much in tandem with what's happening on campus. So we've done a little bit of a hybrid here in DC, much like there is on campus. And we follow all the same guidelines that the university is. We have a dashboard like a lot of schools do that sort of show how many cases we have. We're doing random testing of all of our students on campus, and have been trying to make sure that we keep everyone safe. So we had to think about those kinds of things when we were considering whether or not we could do something here in Washington, D.C. Typically, students come here for the semester and they do internships 4 days a week and classes in the evenings. We only have 5 students here this semester. Typically, it's more like 20. So they are doing mostly virtual internships. One student is doing an in-person internship at the Pentagon, but our professor has actually stayed on campus. So while we usually have a resident professor with 5 students, we decided that that professor would stay back on campus so she could teach in person with students there, and then our students do it virtually. But one of the things that we had to make sure we could provide is that these students here in DC could be safe. And so we have a partnership with a medical group here in DC where they can do virtual healthcare with them and telehealth, and they can get tested anytime they need to. And we also made sure that we could provide some of the same services they do on campus with mental health and counseling and things like that. So those are the things we really wanted to make sure is that we could provide a safe environment, but also provide a really good experience in DC.
What, Jennifer, what do you worry most about? That somebody tests positive and the whole thing gets shut down, or what?
Here in DC?
Yeah.
Or on campus. Well, here we have, one of the things we had to do was make sure we had a very quick way to isolate someone if they did test positive. So we have a very quick way to isolate students so that they're hopefully the other students wouldn't be affected. But if we need to quarantine everybody separately, we can do that in a really quick way. So that was one of the things we had to do. So we actually don't feel like if we had a case that we would have to shut this down.
Good. Abby?
So I want to bring Professor Williams in as well. So the Notre Dame University president wrote an op-ed a little while back about why the university would open, framing it in terms of morality versus science. He said, educating the young people who are the future leaders of our society is worth risking a good deal. And so, Professor Williams, I want to ask how this has worked out for Notre Dame so far. What happened to the students who couldn't return because of COVID concerns?
Yeah, well, just to quote exactly what Jenkins said, we are in our society regularly willing to take on ourselves or impose on other risks, even lethal risks for the good of society. We send off young men and women to war to defend the security of our nation, knowing that many will not return. We applaud medical professionals who risk their health to provide care to the sick and suffering. I can't speak for everybody, but my initial reaction was kind of like terror. I mean, we're heading off to college. I did not realize that we were all going to risk our lives or something.
Right.
But that language has played well with some people, did not play well with others. But this notion that we're off to a great war, it played well with some people, but not others. Mm-hmm. As far as how it went, well, we were here, in classes for about 8 days. On the 7th day of classes, everything shut down. Or rather, everything went online. Okay, we had 147 cases after just barely over a week, and we're not that big of a university. And the numbers just kept on growing. Okay, now we actually crossed the 700 mark the other day, but the rate has been much slower. Okay, and that's why they feel better. Wow. But certainly Notre Dame just got off to a terrible start, and they refer to it as missteps. I think it's a little more than that.
Professor, how much of that was? I'm sorry to interrupt. How much of that was externally driven by what was going on nationally and what the federal government was saying?
Well, I can tell you this. We did testing of everybody before they came in, something like 12,000 tests, only 33 positives. And Notre Dame hailed that as a sign, well, our students have been so well behaved. Everybody's been taking it seriously. We come back, and a week into classes, we've got 147, and then it goes up to 700. So certainly, you know, this is another argument. Should we have reopened at all? Many universities did not. But we were certainly not in the clear, either locally or nationwide, when Notre Dame resumed. I think the original idea was that, okay, this is all going to calm down during the summer. By August 10, the nation will be in pretty good shape, and we'll start classes early so that by the end of the semester, we'll avoid the big late season surge that people thought we might have. Well, the problem is that the first wave never died down. You know, we're over 200,000 cases now. And originally people thought, hey, well, you know, come May, June, July. But I don't think anybody anticipated that every state practically is going to drop large numbers of restrictions and declare victory. I mean, a lot of places basically declared victory when we were far from victory. And, you know, at the same time, like on August 6th, we bragged about how we had been consulting with Johns Hopkins. On August 6th, Johns Hopkins said it was going all online.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and, you know, Johns Hopkins, they know something about medicine. They know something about public health. And I actually wrote a note to the provost that day and said, look, it's not too late to back out of this. But several schools, several top schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they were all doing something other than fully reopening. But Notre Dame and several other schools stuck with the fully reopening approach. The national situation did not help, but I don't think we were showing good judgment either.
Interesting. We want to bring our next guest in shortly, but let me just leave you with a question, and then we can come back to it. What's the silver lining here? Jennifer, think about that, and Professor Williams. Are we going to produce better citizens out of this with these young people, more conscientious? Are they going to be more attentive to paying attention to science, or is there no silver lining? So why don't we bring our next guest, who's Professor Amir Fleischman from University of Michigan, and with the leader in the graduate employees organization, which is a union. They've been very, very concerned about public safety and not entirely happy with the safety that's been provided. Is that a fair characterization, Professor?
That may even be an understatement. Yeah, so last week and I guess the week and a half prior, graduate students at the University of Michigan were on strike over the university's reopening plans, calling for more robust testing, the unconditional option for graduate student workers to teach remotely, and for some additional support for international students and parents and caregivers, as well as a series of anti-policing demands that we saw as incredibly important in the context both of the pandemic itself and the uprisings for racial justice occurring across the country this summer.
So Amir, can you tell us a little bit about what a safe and just pandemic response looks like? So that was one of the demands, right, of the strike. You know, like, does that include diverting funds from one place to another? Does it look like not reopening? Does it look like, you know, all virtual classes? Like, what does that really look like?
Yeah, so that's a term that we sort of use to encapsulate all the different aspects of our demands. I think it has a few different parts. So GEO, my union, doesn't have a position on whether there should be in-person learning. But if there is, it needs to be done safely. So that's one of the things we were demanding, that the university have a sufficient testing policy that in-person learning is possible. But we also want to make sure that all the different groups on campus who are differently affected by the pandemic are treated fairly by the university and allowed, or the conditions are created so that they can thrive in the campus when it's reopened. So I mentioned parents and caregivers as one group who we were advocating for. So the University of Michigan's in Ann Arbor, and in Ann Arbor this term, all public schools are going to be online. So parents, and many of whom are grad students, need to have additional childcare because their children are going to be at home all day, and now they're working from home. So one of the things we were fighting for was for the age limit for the childcare subsidy that we have won through our contract negotiation to be raised, because it used to apply only to children who were, before school age. So if you were a school age child, you wouldn't be eligible for it. But because now, 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, whatever, are now going to be at home, they are going to require childcare too. So through our labor action, we were able to raise that limit for the length of the pandemic to 15 years old, which was a huge victory for us. I'll also add that, of course, this childcare issue is a gendered issue. So this affects women graduate students more than male graduate students, who are more burdened with the issues of childcare. So that was just one aspect. Our policing demands we see as inseparable from our pandemic-related demands. So there are two reasons for that. One is that when other comparable institutions like the University of Minnesota were ending ties with local law enforcement agencies, the University of Michigan was using the pandemic as an excuse to actually expand cooperation with law enforcement. So they did this through this so-called Michigan Ambassadors program, where they were essentially empowering community members to act as vigilantes in reporting people who were violating social distance to the police. And through the work of some undergraduate groups on campus, the Students of Color Liberation Front, they've actually ended this program because it's just so out of whack with what we know about how the police would handle these issues. I'll also add that the policing demands, like the pandemic demands, are come out of the knowledge that both the pandemic and racist policing disproportionately affect the most vulnerable members of our community, particularly people of color.
If I could ask both of you, both professors, what I was sort of teasing before we brought Professor Fleischman up. What are the, when you look back 5 years from now, 8 years from now, you'll have a lot of thoughts, obviously, and a lot of experiences. But what will you say was gained that might not have otherwise been gained? What were the what are the one or two benefits that you see from going through this catastrophe? Professor Williams?
That's hard to answer right now. I just think nationwide, I'm still kind of astounded how many people think this whole thing is a hoax, or that, 200,000 people, that is no big deal. I hope for our students, at least, they maybe gain some kind of sense of responsibility. They realize that they are interconnected. I mean, all the people who say, well, it's my right to wear a mask or not. Notre Dame students I talk to will say, no, you have to do it. You have an obligation to other people. I've seen people say faculty can get sick, the staff can get sick, and you can shut this university down if you insist on doing the kind of partying that was happening the first week. So I hope that's what will be gained, that people will just kind of maybe appreciate science a little more, at least our students will, and that they'll have a greater sense that, it's not just all of your individual rights, that other people are affected and possibly affected very seriously by what you do or do not do.
Amir, is the trade union movement going to be strengthened because of this?
I certainly hope so. So I think the biggest gains for us from this strike were, one, that we actually forced the university to talk to us, to negotiate with us over these policing issues, which they had refused to do before. So that's a big change. Now they've implicitly acknowledged that this is a labor issue. Additionally, I'll add that our membership rate right now is the highest it has been since Right to Work was implemented in Michigan. So our members are fired up and ready to keep fighting for a safer and more just campus. I'll also add that the university's response to the pandemic, while despicable, is also incredibly predictable. And I think what this has shown to many on our campus, be it the graduate students who went on strike, to the hundreds of undergrads who are out there with us, including the residence advisors, the RAs who struck themselves, the dining workers who are organizing, and even the faculty who voted no confidence in the president of our university, is that the status quo ante is not acceptable for us anymore. We need a university that is more than just a hedge fund with a sports team and a college as a side gig. We need a university that cares about our students, and I'm hoping that this will be a real turning point to push back against the trends of the past several decades that have turned the university from a place of learning into just another business.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you're touching on the budget shortfalls, but I think some of the themes that I'm hearing too are like, this is about a community, right? This is about people over profits. And so there needs to be a significant concern when planning to reopen, that for the safety of students, for the safety of staff, for the safety of faculty, and then also making sure that, you know, if we are in a virtual space or if we are in an in-person space, that people have the resources that they need. So it's not just thinking about like, do you have a laptop, right? Or do you have access to Wi-Fi? It's like, do you have childcare, right? Now that we are all in this together. So I do want to bring Jennifer back and talk a little bit about what the future of education looks like. And I know Toby started off, ended our first segment with a question about, you know, what does the future of education look like, right? So what are, is online learning the future of higher education as this pandemic extends? And I'd love to hear what you all are talking about amongst, you know, your various colleagues at your universities. Is this something that we're in, you know, for the long term? And then what do we need from governments, from schools, from the private sector to make this work?
Jennifer?
Well, I think to sort of answer that question and maybe one of Toby's about what are some of the silver linings. I mean, I think Wake Forest does put a very high premium on face-to-face classroom experience. We aren't able to do that for a lot of this semester, but we're able to do it where we can. But I think one of the benefits is our faculty really have, they've really sort of blossomed in this experience in terms of figuring out what can they do. If they can't be in the classroom, how can they teach and how can they build those relationships with students? And I think they've done an amazing job with it. They're very tired, I will tell you that. But, you know, I've been talking to some faculty on campus who are sort of excited now that they've learned a lot about what they can do with technology. And some of them have had better relationships with their students through this process because the students are reaching out on a more regular basis, because they, even though they can't have the face-to-face and eye-to-eye interaction that Chris was talking about earlier, they want to have these relationships with faculty members. And so some of them are getting to know their students even better. The other silver lining I'm seeing is our students are really resilient. And even though this semester on campus and the semester in DC isn't what they pictured, I think they're getting a new sense of confidence that even when it's not what they thought it might be, that they can still make the best of it. And I think they're finding new ways to interact with their faculty members and their fellow students.
Professor Williams, what about your faculty colleagues? Are you pretty upbeat about how they're doing, how they're feeling? What's their morale like?
I rarely see any of them in person, so I guess it's a little bit hard to tell. I think they're feeling better than they did at the peak of the crisis. So we haven't had to cancel or go online completely. You know, as far as I can never see Notre Dame being an all online or primarily online university. There is a great value of being here face-to-face. But I think we might be more open to what online can do. I'm quite pleased with my classes. I'm all online, and I am talking to my students more than ever. It helps not having small children. I have no social life. But I've talked to students at 9 o'clock at night. I talk to them on weekends. It's just really convenient when you don't have to make this big trip to your office for what may prove to be a 5-minute meeting. I've had guest lectures come in. I've attended conferences that I would never have been able to attend if I insisted on going in person. And it's just nicer to go in person, but it's nicer to be online as to not be there at all. So I have a feeling that at Notre Dame, at least, this will not be the end of online. We'll take out the best aspects of it, or at least some people will take out the good aspects of it, and they'll try to keep on using them. If nothing else, I think meeting people online has a lot to be said for it. But as far as morale, I don't know that anybody's real thrilled with the way the world is right now. I mean, I get to be all online, but I still get bored. I'd like to see something other than pictures of people. But I think most people are probably coping okay. The point that was made about childcare earlier, I think, there are times when I miss having small children. During a pandemic is not one of them. I think it would be a nightmare dealing with a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old right now. My daughter is in graduate school, and she has to help manage all these kids. And I can't imagine what it's like for the faculty with small kids who are teaching. So, going back to your first speaker, I hope we can get the littler kids back in school at least, because it really is a tremendous burden. I hope we can get them back safely, because it is a tremendous burden on working parents to have children at home.
Well, yeah, going back to our first guest, Chris Wiley, the high school teacher from Reynolds. I mean, if I were in your shoes, Jennifer, Professor Williams, I might be a little concerned about the people that are going to be delivered to me, or won't show up at all, or will be, not as well educated or developed as they would have been because of this crisis. We don't know that, but one can surmise from what Chris Wiley said about a lot of these young people falling back. The 4-year college university was not exactly sacrosanct before this crisis. I mean, there are a lot of discussions that you're more familiar with than we are, because of where you sit and where your expertise is, about what are we doing here? What's with all this bricks and mortar? What are we educating people for? Is that kind of question of the bricks and mortar in classroom 4-year college going to be intensified because of this?
I may be wrong. I think we're going to survive no matter what. I mean, people are going to want to come to Notre Dame. But there's a lot of colleges going bankrupt. There may be a lot of people now saying, wait, I can get a pretty decent education and not leave my house. I mean, the top 25, top 100 universities, I imagine there's going to be demand for residential education in those places in spite of everything. When you go to the 1,000 universities below that in the rankings, I'm not so sure what will happen with them. I'm going to retire soon, so it won't affect me much either way. But I just have a feeling we're going to come out of this okay. Wake Forest will probably come out of it okay. Harvard's going to come out of it okay. I'm just not sure about a lot of those smaller junior colleges and regional colleges. A lot of them are taking a huge financial hit right now, and we'll have to see what happens to them.
Yeah, I'd say I would agree with that. I think the demand's still going to be there. I think this now intensifies our need to make sure that we are that we are continuing to increase diversity on campus, and it becomes a little bit harder because of some of the challenges, Toby, that you just mentioned, and where people are coming from in their education and what these years of the pandemic do to that. And so I think Wake Forest is just going to have to put even more effort into fundraising in a way that allows us to bring a diverse student body to campus, which may be a little harder now. And it may impact our, all of our international students certainly are impacted right now. We don't know for how long that's going to continue to be an issue with students not being able to come to campus.
And big financial aid issues. I mean, I don't know the actual numbers, but Notre Dame said our income is going to be down. Our need for financial aid is going to be greater. So, that may make it harder for people to get to the Notre Dames or the Wake Forest. We don't want to just be the super rich. But it's going to be harder and harder to afford this for some people, and we may have less and less ability to help them. At least that's the fear.
So we have a couple of questions from our audience. So the first one is lots has been written about gaps in education, especially technologically. How can universities ensure that those gaps for students are being shrunk so that education is accessible for everyone?
Well, I'll try it if no one else wants it. I was actually really impressed with Notre Dame back in March, more so than I have been this semester. But they went and sent all the students home, and if they didn't have internet, they bought them internet connections. And I had this one student, a great student, one of my best students, but the family did not have internet. Notre Dame bought them like 3 or 4 months. But there's so many other places that I worry actually more. Well, I worry a lot for grade school children, poor children, people in rural areas. I understand that it's a huge problem. Internet access is a huge problem. I don't think our students have that much of a problem, but I know that, our students are pretty well off, so it's less problematic for them, and Notre Dame did help those who needed help.
Well, and I would say certainly in the pandemic, I think Wake Forest faculty were trying to be as accommodating as they could for the students that did have struggles. From everything from what Chris was saying earlier, with having siblings that were at home that they were then asked to help take care of, to people who were in different time zones that made it difficult for them to participate, and they were very accommodating. To do that on a grander scale is harder, but certainly it's something that we have to think about. I will say for Washington, D.C. and our program in terms of non-pandemic times and now, our goal is that any student that's at Wake Forest can come through this program without it being an additional financial burden on them. So we make sure that they are not, everything down to paying for their Metro cards, to making sure that they have the financial means to fly here if they need to fly here. We make sure it's a sort of even playing field, that it won't cost them additional funds in order to be here. And we try to do the same thing with students who want to study abroad, because so a high percentage of Wake Forest students study abroad, and it is, as many people know, a life-changing experience. We want to make sure that all of our students, regardless of their financial circumstances, are able to do that.
Another question that we have is testing. So I assume this means COVID testing has become a financial concern for universities. Schools that have the funding to constantly test students do so, but those that are in a tough financial situation, which many schools have not tested on a mass scale. Should testing take priority over financial concerns? And should the government help?
You can go ahead.
Well, I can speak about, obviously, and again, we have the financial resources where there are certainly things that we're not able to do because we're doing testing. And I will say we're putting testing pretty high up in our priorities. So we're doing a random testing now. And that's been very important for us in order to keep it safe. And that's how we have this dashboard and know exactly how many cases we have at any given moment based on testing. And I do think it has to be a priority, but that is a challenge for schools and universities that don't have those financial resources to be able to do that.
I wonder if we could ask our producer, Olivia, if Amir Fleischman, if Professor Fleischman's still with us, if we could get him back to respond to the question about testing. It was something that I wanted to hear his what his organization, his union's position has been on testing.
And I believe Chris had a response as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so
Amir,
testing,
did you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So testing was one of our key demands in our campaign. So the University of Michigan right now is not doing any asymptomatic testing of asymptomatic individuals, which we believe is a huge mistake. I am sensitive to what was said earlier about financial priorities for different universities. And if the University of Michigan didn't have one of the largest endowments in the world, I would say maybe it should shift to all online and not have to worry as much about testing. But that just isn't the case. The University of Michigan has $6.7 billion in unrestricted reserves in its endowment. It can definitely afford to have a more robust testing policy. The administration is choosing not to do that. And I think that says a lot about where their priorities are. Who is getting the best testing? The football players, not the bus drivers, not the nurses.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Wiley was with us at the beginning of the show and is a public school teacher at Reynolds High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Chris, did you have something to say?
I did. When asked about, the question was on the stage about access to devices and things of that nature. I think what's sort of been shown as something of a liability for public schools in a way that it's not for universities, but at that K-12 level, I think we've already moved to a spot where online connectivity should be treated much more like a public utility, just as much as water, or it'd be unthinkable to have, not have water or electricity coming into a home. And it is at a, beyond the point where, access to the internet, to go to school, to work a job, to just connect with the rest of the world, so to speak, that we're past due for making that a public priority. So I think that has been exposed pretty clearly, and I'd love to see that in somebody's talking point. Somebody who wants, my vote should put that in there.
Thanks, that's great.
So I believe we have time for maybe one more question. So someone asked about activities such as football. So Amir, you started raising that a bit. So some schools are prioritizing activities like that over in-person voting. Often universities are a place or holds sort of space for students to vote. So what do you think about this type of decision?
Especially since you're in a Big Ten school.
Yeah, so that seems sort of like an incorrect priority to me anyway. I would say that the university has rightfully been encouraging people to vote absentee. I think that makes a lot of sense. Certainly, our parent union, the American Federation of Teachers, is encouraging that as well. I think one interesting campaign that has started at the University of Michigan, led by students, undergraduate and graduate, is to have the day off on election day, so that people can vote, and more than vote, volunteer in either at the polling stations themselves and get out the vote efforts for their favorite candidate. So I hope the universities and schools generally are putting some thought into how they figure into the democratic process.
That's helpful. And I think Professor Williams might have a response to that.
Yes, there I am. Yeah, as luck would have it, we're supposed to be playing Wake Forest this Saturday.
Right.
And we had 13 players test positive in the last few days.
Right.
So now the game's been postponed to December 12th. So I guess we dodged a bullet momentarily or something. But one thing, I've said it only half jokingly. I could see having football if most of the students weren't on campus. And if most of the students are on campus, not having it, but having both at the same time worries me. And
Yeah.
what really worries me, first off, there are concerns about the football players, but I'm actually more worried about the student body. And on November 7th, at least according to the current schedule, Notre Dame plays #1 Clemson. At this point, both teams would probably be favored to be undefeated at that time. So that's a game with national championship implications. Classes end 5 days later. Everybody's off campus within a couple of weeks. Now, I'm just really worried that, yeah, maybe we have been really well behaved and everything's been going great. But if we win a de facto national championship game, what is that going to do to discipline on campus? I mean, if we win that game, it would be the biggest win since we beat #1 Florida State back in 1993. So I'm just very nervous about this.
Yeah.
And then we're leaving 2 weeks. Everybody's supposed to be gone 2 weeks after that game. You know, how are you going to get all these tested? Are we going to be sending a bunch of people home that are carrying COVID with them?
Right.
I mean, I think it's just going to be super important to maintain super discipline those last 2 weeks. And I really wish we were playing, if we're going to play #1 Clemson, I'd rather it be in a week or two. I really dislike it being right before classes.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I guess we're just about out of time, but you mentioned another date in November. Where our show is November 4th. You mentioned the 7th. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question since we don't really have time for the answer, and I'd be putting you on the spot anyway to ask you a question like this. But for all three teachers, professors, we started this show, at least in the first or second show, months ago, with Professor Lawrence Douglas as he unveiled his book called Will He Go? And the book is based on Professor Douglas's research and worries that we don't have constitutional and statutory guidelines, rules, laws, regulations that guarantee that a president leaves if, in fact, you can muddy the waters with the Electoral College and so forth. In recent days, this has become even more of an issue. And I think if I were the head of the faculty for any of your schools, I would be asking all three of you to prepare your lesson plans for November 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, because you're not going to find, in all likelihood, any of it in a textbook. So I think we'll leave you all with that. And thanks so much for joining us. You were just such a great panel. And Jennifer, who's not on screen right now, thank you so much from the Wake in Washington program. We'll see you all next time.